Will the film reach $8,500 this year? Is that a moonshot prediction or realistically possible in 2025? A warm welcome to Crypto Eule. Things are very exciting right now with what's happening. The company chart keeps climbing, and currently there are forecasts saying that $8,500 is a realistic figure for the year 2025. But there are also moon price predictions, moonshot forecasts of around $10,000 and even higher, circulating right now on X and other social media platforms. But according to analysts, $8,500 is absolutely achievable even this year. Let's start with the market analysis and of course dive into this company chart, which just keeps running and running. It's incredible. We're not far from the all-time high anymore. If we look at the highest price, then we're still, if I hit it exactly, about 3% away from the all-time high here on the daily chart, 4-hour chart. We can see that it's rising nicely at night. It's moving nicely within this registered channel. Sometimes it briefly moves out, then back in. On the daily chart, it's perfectly within the range. Here there's a slight breakout, but otherwise it's very clear that it's performing very well at the moment. So the company is really delivering here. Let's quickly take a look at Bitcoin, just so we have a point of comparison or to see what's happening right now. With the company, or rather, as I mentioned in a short video, people said, "Are you crazy? This isn't a sideways phase at all." But if you look at the whole thing since mid-July, I'd actually say it's a sideways phase with a brief breakout to the downside. But ultimately, in terms of price, we're not far or not much removed from this. Yeah, if we were to draw a line here, just along this dashed line, you'd see it's basically been moving sideways here. Even if it's a bit higher right now, that has happened here before as well. So we can be very curious. $120,000, it's absolutely great to see all of this. But we should be curious to see when we'll hit a new all-time high above $123,300. That's the new all-time high, or maybe a bit lower. But that's the new all-time high, and of course, it's desirable to reach it here. Now, of course, the question is, what does all of this depend on for Firm? What is driving all of this? And that's particularly interesting right now. Firm is currently being heavily pushed. And not just from the institutional side, but also from the user side. Because if you take a look at DeFi Llama, you'll see that currently, if you compare all the chains by activity, you'll notice that 34% of the activity in the last month has come from Firm alone. Of course, others are also benefiting right now when it comes to DeFi or transactions. So the total value locked on Firm is currently continuing to rise, and compared to all other chains, Firm accounts for 61%. This means that users of smart contracts, DeFi, and other protocols are back and currently increasing. And that's a positive development. So you can also say that retail investors are returning to the market because we know and can see that institutions are already present. If we just take a look at the ETFs, we can see that the last few days have been very positive. A strong start on Monday, and Tuesday was also very good. And today is also looking very good, especially if you check on chain to see what's happening with BlackRock and the other ETFs. And BlackRock is currently buying in. In the end, it's always the ETF movements that we see, and right now they're very positive, even though they were negative at the beginning of August. So not much has happened with the ETFs so far, but currently there's a lot of attention on the Ethereum ETFs. Crazy, but true. The reason why so many people are watching this right now and why it's so interesting is because they've started to push the whole thing. Not just building up a Bitcoin strategic reserve, but you could also build up a company strategic reserve, and more companies are doing just that. And that's what we're seeing here. So this is what it looks like. The numbers rising. We can also see this here in the active numbers. They keep rising, and the whole thing is currently being pushed hard. One company that has fought its way up to the top spot is Bitmain. Originally a mining company, but they've said, "We also want to have a strategic reserve in Ethereum," and they're planning to buy even more. More on that in a moment. Sharpling is also buying in here, as is the Ether machine. These are the three at the very top. Otherwise, the list keeps getting longer, with companies that are continuing to buy or are building up a strategic reserve in Ethereum. For example, Bitmain has increased by 605% in the last 30 days, and Sharpling has also continued to buy, up by 177%. We also often find these in BlackRock's ETF, the ETH. That's where most of the investment goes. We can also see that here in the numbers. Over 50% of this money, and again here, over 50% of this money, and here as well, over 50% simply goes through BlackRock's ETH, followed by Fidelity. And that's where these companies mainly invest to build up their strategic Ethereum reserves. And Bitmain is taking it a step further, which of course has once again led to sky-high forecasts or positive breakouts today. Specifically, Bitmain has announced that they want to invest another 20, not million, $20 billion in Ethereum. That's their plan, in other words, a strategic Ethereum reserve. And the whole thing is going to get very interesting. To finance all of this, they will issue new shares and continue actively buying more Ethereum, according to an official press release. These 20 billion will be raised through share sales and will be invested largely, but not exclusively, in the Ethereum reserve. And of course, you can imagine that shortly after this press release, or rather this announcement, the price went up again, which we saw today or last night. So Ethereum is currently on a very good path. If you want to invest in cryptocurrencies, for example in Ethereum, then check out the crypto exchange CoinEx, our long-standing partner. There, you can easily buy cryptocurrencies like ETH and over 1,000 others currently available, whether it's a spot or limit order, all very easily with an active order book. You can easily buy cryptos here using the quick buy option, peer-to-peer trading via third-party providers, or even use the simple swap function. And of course, you can also easily buy ETH there, and you can see the currently most popular trading pairs here, with Bitcoin, Doge, and Ethereum ranking first to third. And right now, there's an additional bonus. If you register using my link, the first 50 signups will get 10% cashback on their deposit until the end of August. For example, if you deposit $1,000 on CoinEx and have registered through my link, you'll receive $100 as cashback, which you can then use again, for example, for futures trading. If you're interested in other exchanges, check out our exchange comparison on cryptoyule.com. You'll find all the links and so on in the video description, where you can also check out other exchanges. This forecast of $8,500, how can it be justified? Or rather, why do people arrive at this number? There's an explanation for this, and it goes like this. The assumption is a Bitcoin price of $150,000 in 2025. Then Ethereum has a market share that was the highest market share they've ever had in the crypto market so far. Not in terms of Bitcoin's price, so don't set up a proportion here, but rather the crypto market share of up to 35%. If you take these numbers and put them into a calculator or into the analysis, you arrive at an Ethereum price of $8,500. But to be completely honest, the market forecast, or rather this analysis, is based on the highest level of Ethereum's market share. That was roughly here in 2017, when the market share, if you want to be precise, was around 32 to a maximum of 35%. But in 2021, the share was at most here, approximately the highest rate, as I said, you have to be precise, at 21%. So they really used older figures here, but that's the explanation for how they arrived at a price of $8,500. Of course, if the Bitcoin price rises even higher. For example, if you take the analysis from Santander here, the well-known credit bank. They, for instance, go so far as to say $200,000, but we've also already seen other price forecasts from analysts or people who have appeared on American television who have said that $250,000 in 2025 or by spring 2026 is possible. Then, of course, it's possible that Ethereum will also continue to rise if it maintains this crypto market share. We're talking about the entire crypto market, so as I said, set up a simple proportion. Bitcoin at $250,000, that's 100%. So what would 35% of that be? No, that's a completely different number comes out of that. That would really be heading toward a moonshot prediction. And a moonshot prediction, that's currently over $10,000 here, because those are really numbers that are quite far-fetched. You also have to keep in mind that the current Ethereum price would still have to almost double to reach those $8,500. And that would, of course, be huge if it were to just double like that. A lot would have to happen for that, but it's not impossible. But you have to be honest and stay realistic. This whole thing will still take some time. Right now, a lot of companies are investing, but not just in Ethereum. There's a great website at the moment called Crypto Treasury Tracker. It's really well made, I have to say, because here you can see all the companies that have currently invested the most. For example, you can also see the ETFs here, like the iShares Bitcoin Trust. That one is led here by BlackRock. This is a Bitcoin ETF, and it currently has the most assets. If you scroll down a bit, you'll also find, for example, a public community that invested in XRP, and they did so even before us, or just below the first ETH ETF. So it's also interesting that a public community has invested in XRP here, or rather a treasury, since it's the treasury tracker that lists it here. It's also interesting to see that the ARK21 shares Bitcoin ETF is listed below Ukraine, which is investing. The page is just updating a bit, but as we can see, it's a nice site to get an overview of everything. A lot of ETH holdings here, mainly ETFs at first, but eventually companies like the Ether machine will show up. And somewhere here we should also see Sharpling, and a bit higher up we should see Bitmain, which is above Ukraine and has invested in Bitcoin. An exciting site, and there could be many more companies joining in to invest here. September will also be exciting, especially because the topic of interest rate cuts in the US is a very important one. Yesterday, new inflation figures were released and they have dropped slightly. The forecast was 2.8%. Previously, it was 2.7%. So it stayed at 2.7%. So they didn't drop, but they were below the expected forecast. And that's a positive sign. There are platforms that assess the likelihood of interest rate cuts or whether there will be any at all. And currently, the assessment is at 99.8% that we will see an interest rate cut in September. So Jerome Powell is under pressure, and we can be very curious to see whether he will push through an interest rate decision, a positive one, meaning a rate cut, or whether the Fed will decide in favor of it. This could trigger another price surge, and we can be very curious to see how the crypto market, especially Ethereum and Bitcoin, might benefit from it. We can be very curious to see how things will develop from here. If you take a look at the chart, specifically Ethereum versus Bitcoin, it naturally looks positive. So Ethereum is currently performing better than Bitcoin. As I said, according to my forecast or my view of the whole situation, Bitcoin is more in a sideways phase. We briefly broke downwards, but the dashed line shows that it continues along this path. And Ethereum clearly, as we can also see here with the regression channel, is showing a positive upward movement and is close to its all-time high. I can also imagine that the all-time high could be reached this week, even though there are still 3 days left in the week. We can be very curious. Although cryptocurrencies are 24/7, so things are always moving, we can be very curious to see whether Ethereum will break the new all-time high at around $4,870 or even higher, of course. However, I can imagine that after reaching the new all-time high, there will be a brief sell-off before gaining momentum again to move further upward. Of course, it's also exciting to see what the companies will do. Will Bitmain really invest all the money they will raise from the new stock sale here? Then, of course, we'll see a positive movement, especially for companies if the money goes into Bitmain's company reserves. So things remain exciting at the moment, but making moonshot predictions is always difficult. However, according to analysts, $8,500 is a possibility as long as the market doesn't completely reverse or Ethereum even outperforms Bitcoin even more dramatically. We can be very curious. What do you think about this topic? Write it in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like. Subscribe to the channel for free so you don't miss any updates, and I want to say thank you very much for watching. See you in the next video.